12 years ago, a strange object was found. A capsule, discovered buried deep in a remote area, far from any civilization. Its surface was unlike anything seen on Earth, constructed from materials that defied our understanding, substances that didn't belong to this planet. The capsule's origin was clear. It hadn't come from here. It looked as though it had been placed, or perhaps even thrown down from the sky. Whoever had sent it, they weren't from our world. The discovery of the capsule was kept under the strictest secrecy. Governments around the globe collaborated in silence, and only a handful of people were even aware of its existence. The public knew nothing, and even those within the highest circles had no answers to the fundamental question: why had this capsule been sent to us? The very presence of the object hinted at a message, a purpose hidden within it, but no one knew what that purpose was. When they finally cracked open the capsule, what they found inside was both beautiful and terrifying. Those who first laid eyes on it were struck by an unshakable sense of dread, as if they were looking at something meant to warn or to guide. The panic began to spread among those few who knew of its existence. They could tell that this object wasn't just a specimen. It was a message, a warning of some kind. But its meaning was obscured, locked behind a code they couldn't yet crack. They needed someone who could understand the connections that others could not. Someone who could bridge the gap between its alien biology and the viruses they knew. That's when they came to me. I was in my lab, working late. My focus was on a set of routine viral samples, just another collection of mild pathogens that the world had already dismissed as harmless. We were tracking a new virus at the time, one that seemed no worse than the common cold. It reminded me of a virus from long ago, something known as COVID-19. But this one was even milder. Just a cough, a bit of a fever, maybe some fatigue. It spread quickly, yes, but it wasn't dangerous. There was no risk of it being lethal, or so we thought. Then I heard the doorbell ring, a sound that echoed through the silence. I glanced up from my work, expecting nothing more than a delivery or a routine check-in. When I opened the door, I was greeted by 3 individuals who looked like they had come straight from the front lines of some unseen war. Their faces were drawn, eyes hollowed out, like they carried the weight of a secret they wished they didn't know. "We need your help," one of them said, his voice cracking just slightly. "We need you to examine something for us." I was puzzled by their urgency, their barely concealed fear. "What is it?" I asked, trying to make sense of the tension in the room. "A flower," he replied, and the absurdity of it almost made me laugh. "A flower?" I said, confused. "I'm a virologist. My work is in diseases, pathogens, not plants. Why come to me?" He took a step closer, his eyes not leaving mine. "We need you specifically because it's connected to the virus you've been studying. We believe this plant holds answers. Answers that only someone with your expertise can find." I hesitated, but finally agreed. My curiosity piqued, though I felt no real sense of alarm. After all, this virus had shown itself to be nothing more than an inconvenience, a mild infection that caused barely more than a sniffle in most cases. they looked at me, the way their hands trembled as they handed over the sealed container, made me uneasy. My skepticism melted into shock. The plant was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Its petals glowed softly, with an iridescent shimmer, shifting through hues that seemed unnatural. Its leaves had a texture that defied description, both delicate and tough, almost like living metal. This was no ordinary plant. It was alien in every conceivable way. Still, I didn't connect it to the virus. Not yet. I brought the plant to my workbench, turning on the scanners and preparing my analysis tools. My hands moved through the motions as they always did, testing, scanning, isolating samples, methods I'd performed 1,000 times before. But then, I began to notice something strange, something hidden deep within the cellular structure of the plant. Embedded in its very DNA was a sequence. No, a message. At first, I thought it was just a random arrangement of molecules. But as I continued to analyze it, I realized it was a highly sophisticated code. I spent hours carefully decrypting the patterns. And when I finally unlocked its meaning, I felt the ground shift beneath me. The message from the plant was a warning. It detailed, in excruciating precision, the nature of the virus I had been so quick to dismiss. This virus wasn't just a mild infection. It had a latent stage, a hidden phase we hadn't seen, because we never looked beyond the obvious symptoms. It wasn't the virus that was dangerous on its own. It was what it did once it settled into the human body. The message explained how the virus gradually infiltrated the brain, attacking specific areas like a silent invader. It started by binding to the neural pathways that controlled basic instincts, shutting down the parts of the brain responsible for empathy and self-preservation. Then, it triggered a flood of neurochemicals that amplified aggression and suppressed all rational thought. It was turning people into something primal, something ruthless. As I read further into the message, the true horror of it became clear. The virus reprogrammed its host's brain, creating a feedback loop of violence and hunger. It transformed ordinary people into mindless predators, zombies driven by a need to attack, to spread the infection to others. The virus wasn't a direct killer. It was a manipulator, taking over its host's body and turning it into a vessel of rage and destruction. This was a virus unlike any we had ever encountered. It didn't evolve to kill its host outright. It evolved to spread its influence through carnage. It was as if the virus had a built-in survival mechanism, one that ensured it would continue to thrive by using its host to infect as many others as possible. A virus that turned people into monsters, that stripped them of their humanity and left nothing but hunger and violence. The plant's message contained coordinates, pointing to a distant star system, far from Earth. It had been sent from a civilization far more advanced than our own. As soon as I decoded the message hidden within the plant, my hands trembling with the weight of its revelation, I knew I had to act quickly. The urgency of what I had discovered, the coordinates, the terrifying truth about the virus's potential, left me no choice. I contacted them immediately, my voice unsteady as I relayed what I'd found. There was a pause on the other end, silence so heavy it seemed to stretch on forever. The subtle sound of disbelief turning into dread. "Are you sure?" one of them finally asked, his voice thin and strained, as though he was hoping I would say no, that I had made a mistake. "Yes," I said, forcing the word out through clenched teeth. "These coordinates, they're not from any system we know. And the virus, it's not what we thought. It's far worse." Their silence was suffocating. The kind of silence that only comes when someone is staring into the abyss of the unknown, realizing that it's deeper and darker than they ever imagined. Their faces, even through the screen, looked gaunt and hollow. They were scientists, soldiers, decision makers, people trained to handle crises. But in that moment, they seemed small, vulnerable, utterly human. "You can't tell anyone what you found," they finally said, their voices hardening into something cold and unyielding. "Not your colleagues, not your family, no one." The words struck me like a hammer blow, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. The thought of keeping something so monumental, so world-shattering to myself, it felt like a betrayal. Not just of my family, but of humanity itself. How do you carry the weight of knowledge that could break the world and yet stay silent? They must have seen the conflict in my eyes because their tone softened, if only for a second. "This isn't just about you," they said. "Panic is the greatest enemy right now. If people knew, if they even suspected the truth about the virus and what it could do, civilization as we know it would collapse overnight." I nodded, not because I agreed, but because there was nothing else to say. I was trapped by the enormity of the secret, shackled by the responsibility of a truth that no one could bear to hear. A week passed in a haze of fear and sleepless nights. Every creak of my lab, every whisper of the wind outside, made me jump. I was haunted by what I had seen in the data, by the knowledge that a cataclysm was already in motion, creeping closer with every breath we took. And then they contacted me again. Their faces appeared on my screen, no less tense, but with a new glint in their eyes. A hint of determination, of grim resolve. "We're assembling a team," they said. "A crew to be sent to the coordinates you discovered. We have to know what's out there. We have to find answers." "Is it safe?" I asked, though I already knew there could be no real answer to that question. They exchanged glances, a flicker of doubt crossing their features. "It's highly unlikely that anything hostile awaits us," one of them said, though his voice wavered, as if even he didn't believe his own words. "They wouldn't send coordinates just to lead us to our deaths, right? There must be a reason, a purpose behind this. Perhaps they're trying to guide us." But then they lowered their voices, their expressions darkening. "We aren't telling the astronauts everything," they said. "They won't know about the virus, about what's truly at stake here. If they did, they'd never leave. They'd never abandon their families." I felt my throat tighten, the implications of their words cutting through me like a blade. They were sending these people into the unknown, hiding the full extent of the danger, deceiving them for the sake of the mission. It was necessary, yes, but it was cruel in a way that tore at my soul. And then they asked the question that I hadn't seen coming. "Do you know anyone who might be an ideal candidate?" We need the best, the absolute best. For a moment, I was speechless. I could barely move, barely think. And then, in the stillness of that moment, her face came to my mind. My daughter. My daughter, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. She's a specialist in xenobotany. She's brilliant, far beyond my abilities. She knows everything there is to know about alien plant life and much more. I could see them taking in my words, weighing my recommendation. Are you sure? They asked, their gazes piercing. Do you understand the risks of what you're suggesting? I did. I understood all too well. It was one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make, sending her off into the unknown, knowing the dangers she might face out there. But I also knew that she was our best chance, humanity's best chance. If anyone could find the answers hidden in the stars, it was her. It tore at my soul to say it, but I let the words fall from my lips like a prayer. I'm sure. Now, 12 years later, with the world in ruins, I think back on that moment. The choice I made, the risk I took. It feels like the right choice, one of the few choices I don't regret, considering how everything else has turned out. She was our last hope, the one who could make a difference, even as the world crumbled around us. My daughter was chosen for the mission. She was the one to follow the path into the darkness that the plant had illuminated for us. But I have another daughter too, the youngest one. And to this day, I don't know if she's alive or dead. I lost her in the chaos, in the roaring sea of humanity that panicked when the first reports of the infected started to spread. She was swept away in a tide of fear, disappearing into the madness. I remember grabbing her hand, holding on so tight my knuckles turned white. But the crowd surged like a living thing, tearing us apart. Her eyes locked onto mine, wide with terror, her mouth forming words I couldn't hear over the screams and the stampede. Then she was gone, swallowed up by the throng, lost to me. Before we were separated, I had whispered to her, "If we ever get split up, head to the mountains. Stay there until I find you." I don't know if she remembered what I said, or if she even made it out alive. I've wandered those mountains for a long time, searching for any sign of her, calling her name into the cold wind, even though I know the chances of finding her are so heartbreakingly slim. And my husband, my rock, my partner through it all, he didn't make it either. He was bitten by the infected, his skin turning gray and cold, his eyes losing their light just moments after our daughter vanished. I watched the transformation take him, saw the person I loved become something else, something mindless and driven by hunger. I had to let him go. I had to run, knowing that the man I once loved was gone forever. Now, as I look back on all that's happened, I can't help but question every choice, every sacrifice. I wonder how much of this was ever within our control, how much of it was destined to happen, no matter what we did. Was this all part of some grand design? Or were we just caught in the gears of a machine too vast for us to comprehend? 12 years later, I'm still searching for answers in a world that's been torn apart, still holding on to the hope that somewhere out there, my daughter is fighting to find a way back to us, fighting to bring light to the darkness that has swallowed our world whole. And as long as she's out there, as long as there's a chance, no matter how small. I will never stop searching.